So hello, everyone. Thank you for being a part of our High Holiday celebration. Tonight, we'll be hearing from 9 humanistic rabbis. I am not one of them. My name is Paul Golin. I'm Executive Director of the Society for Humanistic Judaism, SHJ. SHJ is the umbrella organizing body of humanistic Judaism in North America. We've got 28 affiliated congregations and communities in the US and Canada. We also have independent members from all over the planet. I wanted to take this moment to welcome you all and wish you a happy Jewish New Year, L'Shana Tova. We had a huge registration for tonight's event, and while many of you are already members of the Humanistic Judaism movement, I want to especially welcome any newcomers we have with us tonight. I think the high holidays are a great way for us to introduce why and how secular and humanistic Jews still derive meaning from Jewish ritual and holiday celebration. Jews in general fall along a wide spectrum of belief. Too often, this spectrum is portrayed as religiously Jewish on one end and completely assimilated on the other. But that's false. It's not assimilation into nothingness on the other end of the belief spectrum. It's other positive values. For example, I personally don't believe that the Jews are God's chosen people. My rejection of that part of Jewish theology is not replaced with nothingness or non-Jewishness or believing someone else is more chosen than the Jews. I replace the chosenness theology with universalism and humanism. And I'm proud of those positive values that say all people are equal and everyone is of infinite value. I want to change the narrative about what's at the other end of the religious spectrum, and not just because I'm among the quarter of all American Jews that describe themselves as atheist agnostic. There's another quarter or more of American Jewry who says they believe in something, just not the traditional organized version of Judaism. So combined, that's more than half the Jews that I would call secular and whose values I describe as humanistic. The work of the Humanistic Judaism movement is to bring forward wisdom and meaning from the Jewish tradition in ways that are still useful and relevant to folks who, for most of us, have our beliefs and values much closer to the humanistic and universalist side of that spectrum than to the Jewish religious or particularist side. When Rabbi Shurim Wein launched Humanistic Judaism nearly 60 years ago, it was because the traditional liturgy he was trained to use in Reform Seminary wasn't an authentic expression of his beliefs. By switching to words that match our beliefs, we not only still benefit from our connection to the Jewish holidays and their meaning, we demonstrate authenticity and integrity about who we are and what we do believe. So if you haven't yet attended a humanistic service before, one of the few silver linings of our current global pandemic is that it's easier than ever to get a glimpse into what's happening at our Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur services. And I encourage you to go watch what was uploaded from this past weekend and sign up for our upcoming Yom Kippur services if you're not already. I think you'll find that because the Humanistic Judaism liturgy is about our experience as people, it universalizes the Jewish meaning, and it works not just for secular Jews, but for friends and family members who may be at different points along the religious spectrum. And we want to welcome and serve people who may be in various places along that spectrum. Yet ultimately, Humanistic Judaism provides a space, a safe space for those of us who are secular, atheist, agnostic, freethinker, humanist, skeptic, spiritual, not religious, to say what we mean and mean what we say, when literally every other Jewish denomination is utilizing that traditional liturgy and asking us non-theistic Jews to just go through the motions or make the words you disagree with mean something different to you. I also see Humanistic Judaism as not just about updating or repurposing from the past into something meaningful for the present. It's about modeling a positive secular future that I'd like my children to live in, and about finding the roles that Jews can play in bringing that about. Because for me, secularity and humanism are positive, world-improving ideologies. And therefore, Humanistic Judaism is on a mission. SHJ seeks to be a voice on behalf of like-minded Jews to the Jewish community and beyond, to let them know that we are proudly Jewish and proudly secular, and we need your involvement and support to do that. Our movement is led in large part by a very unique group of people, humanistic rabbis, who I've been honored to work with and observe. And I have to say that it's a pleasure to see how much they genuinely love one another, support each other, share ideas, and just enjoy being together, even if it has to be virtually. So again, I welcome everyone tonight. If you're not yet involved in Humanistic Judaism, please be in touch. Join our very active Facebook discussion group, and let's find a way to connect. And now I'd like to introduce our first rabbi of the evening, my colleague and the rabbi at the Society for Humanistic Judaism. She's located in suburban Detroit, but her work is truly global, Rabbi Miriam Jerris. And you gotta unmute yourself.
Can always learn how to read lips. The host button. Okay, so thanks, Paul. Nice to see everyone. I decided I would start this evening by reading a poem from my favorite poet, Yehuda Amichai, who's an Israeli poet, and it's entitled Yom Kippur. Yom Kippur, without my father and without my mother, is not Yom Kippur. From the blessing of their hands on my head, just the tremor has remained, like the tremor of an engine that didn't stop, even after their death. My mother died only 5 years ago. She is still being processed between the offices above and the papers below. My father, who died long ago, is already resurrected in other places, but not in my place. Yom Kippur, without my father and without my mother, is not Yom Kippur. Hence, I eat to remember, and drink not to forget, and sort out the vows and catalog the oaths by time and size. In the day, we shouted, "Forgive us," and in the evening, we cried, "Open to us." And I say, forget our sins, forget us, leave us alone at the closing of the gate when the day is done. The last ray of the sun splintered in the colored glass window of the synagogue. The ray of the sun is not splintered. We are splintered. The word splintered is splintered. So for me, Amichai teaches that when we are faced with trauma, we can no longer see the world as we've seen it previously. We cannot go on without confronting how our experiences have changed us, and maybe changed us forever. We are splintered. When we live fully, we experience life in the polarities. We feel despair and we crave hope. We feel fear and we yearn for courage. We feel sad and we seek to be happy. Now, if I were to imagine an end of days scenario, which I don't believe in, I would imagine a worldwide pandemic with over 200,000 people dead in North America. I would imagine a world with spring flooding destroying homes and towns and people's lives. I would imagine a world with hundreds of fires bringing death, destruction, and desecration to everyday existence. I would imagine a world with 9 named hurricanes repeatedly hitting the Gulf Coast of Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, and Florida. And I would imagine the death of Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg on Erev Rosh Hashanah. So I awake each morning, and a day does not go by where I don't feel anxious, sad, fearful, and depressed. It is a constant battle for me to fortify myself so that I can do my job, be a sensitive colleague, be a friend, and be available to help others. So really, it's not my goal to depress you, it wasn't, but rather give you the permission I give myself each and every day to be vulnerable, to feel the entire spectrum of human experience, and seek out others when you need support. Now, we hope that you have joined us this evening, understanding that the staff and the rabbis and the leaders and members of the Humanistic Jewish movement are here to ease your burdens, and tonight to bring meaning to your lives and to accept you fully for who you are and whatever you are feeling. So I wish all of you a Shana Tova U'Metuka, a sweet and happy and authentic New Year.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Rabbi Tzemah Yoreh is the rabbi of the City Congregation for Humanistic Judaism in New York.
Hi, welcome everyone. So when Paul framed this, he said your best idea about best inspirational idea about high holidays. And I said like that was a really tall task because my best ideas are in my sermons for Rosh Hashanah, Kol Nidre, and Yom Kippur. So what was I supposed to do? It was like it was not an easy task, Paul, but I welcome the challenge. And I'm going to go back to something that has actually been like, provided me a framework throughout these last 6-7 months of pandemic. And that has been the class that I've been teaching, first on a daily basis and now on twice a week on Jewish wisdom literature. And what we do in this class is we look at biblical rabbinic wisdom literature, Jewish wisdom literature, and see and examine the aphorisms, examine the sayings, and see how they compare to the modern day world. Do they apply? How they apply? How they differ? How their world differs, and then find lessons for today through that examination. And I've been enjoying this class a great deal, and I've taught it at this point about 100 times, and I'm still going strong, and it's a lot of fun for me. And these days I'm thinking a lot about the concept of moderation, it's a very difficult concept right now to digest, and I really. I want to look at it through the prism of Jewish wisdom literature. And in Jewish wisdom literature, we have, dyads. We have extremes, polarities. Miriam was just talking about those polarities that we have. You're either wise or you're stupid. You're either industrious or you're lazy. You're either good or you're evil. And that is, that's like, it helps frame a world that makes sense. It it provides structure, but it's not. In our day and age, we're very used to complexity, and so we are not attracted to that dyadic thinking. And this is all over the book of Proverbs. It's just all over. It's just all over the. Our wisdom literature corpus, and specifically, I want to look at the statement we have about in the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet. I love the book of Kohelet so much that I changed my second name from Lapidot to Kohelet. So Kohelet is the Hebrew name for Ecclesiastes, and part of the reason I love it so much. Is its worldview. It's out of all the books in the Hebrew Bible, it is a deistic one. It has we are agnostics, atheists, free thinkers, and this is as close as the Hebrew Bible is going to get to that. Is the book of Ecclesiastes. So there's a lot in the world, in Ecclesiastes' worldview and Ecclesiastes' thinking that appeals to me. But one thing that I really did not enjoy in the book of Ecclesiastes were the dyads, and we have this very famous song from, if anybody knows anything about Ecclesiastes, is the song Turn, right? To everything, there's a season and a time for every purpose under heaven. And then there's this group of dyads, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to sow, etc. Time for war, a time for peace. And it's all dyadic. It's all opposites. And the book of Ecclesiastes is full of those, just like all of wisdom literature, except for one specific place. And that is in chapter 7, where you have this statement, in my own brief span of life, I've seen both these things. Sometimes a good man perishes in spite of his goodness, and sometimes a wicked one endures in spite of his wickedness. So don't overdo goodness, and don't act a wise man to excess, or you may be dumbfounded. Don't overdo wickedness, and don't be a fool, or you may die before your time. It is best that you grasp the one without letting go of the other. Now, over here, we have a non-dyadic conception of the world, a world where and he takes the two most common dyads that you find in wisdom literature of the ancient world: good and evil, wise and stupid. He's begging you to go look at this aphorism more closely, because that's what you're supposed to do with aphorisms in the Jewish aphorisms in the ancient world. You're supposed to gaze at them and try to understand how they apply in context. And over here, he's telling you, moderation. I wouldn't seize too much on, focus too much on which dyad. You wanted to draw your attention to it, so you use the most obvious dyads. But what he wanted to tell you is moderation is the path. This golden mean, this idea that we find in different wisdom literatures in the Greek world and philosophy, and it's just that things are on a spectrum, and it's good to understand this, to comprehend this, because in the United States right now, we're at each other's throats: the liberals versus the conservatives, the religious versus the secular. And it's all, we're like at a knife's edge all the time, and it's getting worse every day, as you all well know. And because of the horrible situation we're in. And I always, if there's one thing that I'm learning, is to try to come back to that moderation. If I forget it, I try to draw back into it. And here I find it in a book that's full of dyads, I find that moderation. Thank you. That is my insight for the high holidays.
Paul, you're muted.
Oh, it had to happen. Rabbi Frank Tamburello is the rabbi at the Westchester, New York Community for Humanistic Judaism. And you're muted, so unmute, Frank. Thank you.
Well, good evening, everyone. Shana Tova. I always like to start off with a little story. This happened last year. Rosh Hashanah was on the same time as a General Assembly in New York. I live in Manhattan. Today was out. It was a beautiful day. I had a doctor's appointment, so I walked down to 77th Street. I live in Midtown, 50th Street, and it was tough battling all the hordes of the anarchist day traders on Park Avenue. But I got there okay and back okay. And I was thinking, what am I going to say today? And so last year, a friend of mine had found this shofar in an antique store. It was a huge shofar, some kind of a antelope, whatever it was. And I thought that I would take this with me to one of the shuls that I work with in the city. So as I'm walking on 2nd Avenue, there were cops all over the place. Everywhere you looked, there were hordes of cops because it was the General Assembly. They were protecting all of the dignitaries and whatnot. So one of the cops stopped me because this shofar was in a silk bag. It came from Kazakhstan or someplace. And so the cop said, "What's in there?" And I said, well, it's a, you know, and I didn't get it out. He said to me, "It looks like a weapon." So very stupidly, I said, "Well, it's like for spiritual warfare." Well, they pushed me against the wall and they started grilling me like a hamburger. I said, no, it's a Jewish, you know, it's a Jewish ritual item. And fortunately, one of my neighbors who's Jewish was walking around the corner and they stopped. I said, "Tell them what this is." And she said, "Oh, he's okay. He's just a rabbi, and that we use that on our holidays, you know." So, but I think it's important to approach these really awful days that we're living through with some kind of humor, because if you live in New York, especially, you really do need it. And it really, I have to say, it's very heartwarming to see so many people wearing their masks. But what I wanted to share with you today is on every Rosh Hashanah, I try and find a piece of liturgy that is new. And so this year, a friend of mine had sent me this book. It is a siddur from California. It's from the congregation Shahar Zahav, which means the Golden Gate. So it's from San Francisco. It's the it is the siddur of the Shahar Zahav congregation, which is the LGBTQIQ community. And this, though it's a Reform siddur, it has tons of stuff in it that I think as humanists we can use. And but one thing in particular that I am going to use for Yom Kippur, and I want to share with you, is a contemplation for non-believers. There's this actually section in this prayer book for meditations for non-believers and agnostics. And there's another section of just different type of Amidah meditations as well. So you have woman, a woman's Amidah, you have for Tikkun Olam. This one is a contemplation for non-believers. I like to share it with you. Each time I stand for the Amidah, I sift through the tangle of legend and learning that is our inheritance, searching for my own blessings, my own prayer. I stand with one foot planted in empiricism and the other entwined in the messiness of my own humanity. No body part touches the God of my ancestors. My heart wishes to be open, my mind to be fully present. And so each time I stand for the Amidah, I invent my own religion. The religion I invent makes use of evolution, an unimaginable sweep of time, numberless generations spawning by infinitesimal steps, complex living beauty out of inert matter, driven on by random mutation, natural selection, and environmental change. The tragedy of forms continually dying, and lately the wonder of minds emerging, and with them morality, love, art, cities, and the unprecedented bonus of being demonstrably true. I cry tears of seawater and bleed with the cycles of the moon. My bones are of calcium phosphate, the clay of earth molded into human shape. I share my genes with every organism the world has known, traced back to the rays of the sun, igniting compounds of the sea. And the whole world, the whole organic world of which I am an integral part, constitutes a single great web of life. And I and you are not so much on the earth as of the earth. The religion I invent makes use of curiosity. As Albert Einstein said, curiosity has its own reason for existing. We cannot help but be in awe when we contemplate the mysteries of eternity, of life, of the marvelous structure of reality. It is enough if one tries merely to comprehend a little of this mystery every day. Never lose a holy curiosity. And the religion I invent makes use of prayer. My actions ripple across the collective earth pond that is life. They ripple across the lives of our human ancestors and the lives of our single-celled predecessors. They ripple across the lives of our great-grandchildren yet to be born and of our children already here. Each tea bag I compost, each candy wrapper bottle top soda can I pluck from the beach, each child I teach, each heart I hold with compassion, each act of tikkun olam is a prayer in honor of our human ancestors, one-celled predecessors, a prayer in honor of future generations, and a prayer of the great web of life. And that was written by Claudia Bernard, who is a congregant at Har Zahav. Thank you, Paul, and Shana Tova to everyone.
Thank you so much. And I just want to let everybody know that because we've got such a packed schedule for tonight, I wasn't thinking of doing a Q&A after, but if something really does strike you and you want to put it in the Q&A box, we might have time after, or we will use it as an opportunity to be in touch, or you can use it as an opportunity to connect with us after Yom Kippur for the rabbis, but you can connect with me anytime. Next up is Rabbi Sivan Maas, who is Dean Israel of Tamburello International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism. Now, she lives in Jerusalem. I think it's 3:30 in the morning there. So we gave her a pass, but she did record a message for us that hopefully will play with audio. Let's see. Wow. Lovely. So what we will do now is go to Rabbi Jeremy Kridel of Mahar, the Washington, D.C. Congregation for Secular Humanistic Judaism.
Shana Tova, everyone. So in response to this, pandemic-y stuff, we radically redid our services, which is to say I radically redid my service. It's just me and a computer. And one of the things that I did was kind of focus on, here are the themes of the holiday. And for Rosh Hashanah, we focused on the idea of renewal and the idea of resolve. And in thinking about the idea of resolve, I think it's become hard to have resolve, right? There's a lot of different ways you can take the word resolve, right? Resolve can mean deciding to act, it can mean commitment to action, or it can just mean general commitment and conviction more broadly. And it's hard to have resolve. I think it's particularly sometimes hard to have resolve as a humanistic Jew, because it seems under the conditions that we're in, if we had a winning philosophy, we'd be winning. And, I live right outside of DC. I don't feel like I'm winning. And so I spent a long time thinking about, okay, so what does this mean? And I think the point that I got to, and kind of the thing that inspires me about humanistic Judaism that I want to share, is a focus on reality. That at the end of the day, our resolve has to come from reality. And it's hard to do that in the face of revanchism, which, like, how many people use that word, right? But it's hard to do that in the face of revanchism and all of this stuff. And where I've ended up is that my resolve comes from reality because that's what I'm trying to change. And that what humanistic Judaism does is give us tools to look at reality so that we can then change reality. And that's where the resolve has to come from. So, you know, humanistic Judaism doesn't really try to draw us to pessimism, but if you think about what Carl Sagan wrote about 25 years ago in his Demon Haunted World, he said, you know, he's worried that 30 years time, we're going to have an information economy that gives way to superstition, and we'd be found clutching our crystals and nervously consulting our horoscope, our critical faculties in decline, unable to distinguish between what feels good and what's true. And when we lose sight of reality, we start to think about crystals and horoscopes and all these other things, or when we lose sight of reality and we think there's an institution or a person that will save us, we lose track of reality and everything changes around us, and then we're surprised. And yes, I'm talking directly about Ruth Bader Ginsburg's death, but I'm not just talking about that. Some people know that, I guess technically I'm still a lawyer, although my license is inactive. And some people know that I have actually lost a lot of faith in the legal system because I don't think it really works. And I used to work for a court. So this more than dealing with like not believing in God has been a struggle for me. And I think we lost track at some point of the reality that is there were people who were trying to undo all of these things, and we couldn't count on the courts, and we thought we could, and we couldn't count on the White House, and we thought we could. We couldn't count on government, we thought we could. And humanistic Judaism has been there. If we looked at what Sherwin Wine wrote, he was not always a dramatic optimist, that he was always looking at reality, and that changing reality is the thing that I think humanistic Judaism is calling us to look at, that where the resolve has to come from is knowing that reality can be different, that we have the ability to shape it, even though sometimes we're going to lose. And sometimes we're going to lose big. But that's what humanistic Judaism offers, is the resolve of dealing with the truth, because it's the only way we can be sure that we'll get change moving forward. And it's all kinds of truths, right? Of gender equality, the need for racial justice, the need to defend the secular state. And we lost track of how under threat that was until it's really almost too late. And humanistic Judaism's gift is its insistence that we see reality for what it is, if we want to be able to keep it, if we want to be able to change it and make it better. And so what I invited people at Mahar to do was, tied into this idea of resolve, is to resolve to act for justice, because that's the best way of mourning the loss of one of its advocates. And that's how I suggest we move forward now for people who are very, very, very disturbed by the loss of Justice Ginsburg, is resolving to act for justice is how we move forward from that event, because I think it's what she'd want us to do, and because I think it's really the only thing we can do. So with that, I don't have a very upbeat message, but I have a very realistic message, which is, I think there are things we can do, and we're going to have to spend a long time doing them. And we're going to have to spend a long time making sure we keep our gains. So with that, I'll hand it back to Paul.
Thank you so much. We are now going to hear, I'm determined that we're going to hear from Rabbi Sivan Maas. So let's make this happen, technology.
Good evening, Shana Tova. Happy New Year. My name is Rabbi Sivan Maas, and I'm the Dean of the IISHJ Tzemah here in Israel, in Jerusalem. The freedom to choose, to think, to express, to create are all basic humanistic values, undisputed in Western democracies. Some have established their argument that these humanistic beliefs are based on other beliefs, such as that God created them, as Jefferson famously articulated in the Declaration of Independence. Many believe, like Professor Malkin and Rabbi Sherwin-Wine, that these are humanistic beliefs formulated by human beings to better our personal, social, and political lives, and are very much against mixing any religion with politics. How is this connected to this time of year, the Jewish high holidays, and to us in the Jewish international secular humanistic movement? Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are all about the choices we make. It is a time for soul searching. This is a positive experience. We look forward to being in a new year in which we will all accomplish our goals or hope to improve ourselves and prosper. In other words, hope to make good choices. Hidden away from many Jews between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is another momentous day. This is the fast of Gedalia. This connects to a story about choices. Is this tragic story all about the wrong choices? Will you choose to tell it? How will you choose to tell it? Once upon a time, about 2,500 years ago, in the 6th century BC, in a hot summer day in Israel, a small number of Judean Hebrews were left living in Jerusalem after the destruction of the Solomon Temple by King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon. Many were killed, and many were taken into exile. This, too, was a result of unfortunate choices by Judean kings clashing with the big empires. Each time one of these kings rebelled against the Babylonian Empire, he lost, and so did the people of Israel. Our story begins at a time when the last king, Tzidkiah, lost to one of these rebellions. His sons were killed, he was blinded, and took captive with the people of Israel to Babylon. Nebuchadnezzar appointed Gedalia ben Achikam as governor of the remaining Jews in the land of Israel. Among these refugees who joined Gedalia in Mitzpeh, not far from Jerusalem, was Ishmael ben Netanyah, a descendant from the royal house of Tzidkiah from the David dynasty. This Ishmael chose to plot against Gedalia. He was dissatisfied with his tactical alliance with the Babylonians, was planning to kill him and usurp the leadership for himself. But Gedalia, like many after him, Rabbi, for example, refused to believe that Ishmael will resort to murder. So guess who came to dinner and what happened? Well, it was Ishmael who came to dinner with 10 of his men and murdered Gedalia, as well as all the other Jewish men and Babylonian soldiers who was present at the time. This treachery was followed by more bloodshed, effectively ending the prospects of Jewish settlement in the Holy Land until the return of some of the Jews from the Babylonian exiles about 70 years later. If you had any doubt about mixing religion with politics, this is a good story to tell. The murderer was sure he had the right to do so because he was ascended from David, who was made king by God. In other words, he thought he had the right to be king because God wished him to do so. In memory of Gedaliah's tragic death and its disastrous aftermath, some fast every year because the rabbis of the Talmudic period attributed this day to this event. This time of year, we should be asking ourselves, what do we choose to observe, celebrate, or remember? As I claimed initially, we believe in liberty and freedom to choose, but are we really free to choose? Are we happier because we are free to choose? I'm sure many of you are familiar with the paradox of choice, namely that the more choices you have, it stops us from choosing because we are confused by the number of choices because we are paralyzed, we have escalated our expectations, and we are seldom happy about our choice, believing a better one is just out there around the corner. Does this sound happy to you? In our movement, we absurdly create and offer choices. We tell people that you are secular, you can choose to celebrate your holiday any way you want. Is this freedom paralyzing? Not really, because we don't only offer choices, we offer opportunities and educated professional LA leaders to help us with examples, with tools to choose, like we're meeting tonight with the other rabbis. So take risks and offer a secular humanistic choice. This is why it is so crucial to study our history, such as the story of Dalia, the good and bad alternatives and choices. This is why it is so critical to risk embarrassment, to be brave, to choose from all the dates and all the songs, the song that you will sing or read this year, the holiday that you will observe and celebrate, the one that your grandchild will remember, maybe even remember to quote you, not to kill a president. A few years ago, my father, who passed away last year, Professor Malkin, and myself were challenged by one of the national papers here in Israel to write a secular blessing for Yom Kippur. We chose, and here is an excerpt. We Jews believe in human freedom to choose and fulfill our rights. We Jews believe in justice, equality, and the human right for happiness. We strive to act with integrity, which calibrates our efforts in light of our beliefs. We strive to say only what we believe and do as we say. Let us succeed in keeping our tongue from speaking evil and our lips from speaking deceitfully, to depart from evil and do good, to seek peace and pursue it. For we have the power to have mercy, and it is in our hands to kill or to live. We have the ability to bloom, and we have the power to wither. Let us dare to dream. Let us seek and make peace. Have a happy and healthy new year. Shana Tova from Jerusalem.
Thank you so much, Sivan. You are so good. You can do it in your sleep, literally. And that was very helpful and a really nice message, making our webinar truly international. Next, we're going to hear from Rabbi Jodi Kornfeld of Beth Chaverim Humanistic Jewish Community in Deerfield, Illinois.
Thank you, Paul. I love this opportunity of sharing amongst colleagues, that everybody can kind of hear our different voices and our different approaches. True to type, I will, what I would like to do is reflect on a Torah portion, and it is all cards on the table. It is a heavily edited version of what I spoke about on Rosh Hashanah. And so I want to turn to Numbers 12. Numbers 12, my favorite portion in the entire Torah, tells the story of Miriam, Moses' older sister. And she challenges her authority by asking, does God speak only to you? Doesn't he speak to me too? I'm a prophetess. And for that audacity of speaking out, she suffers the punishment of being stricken with leprosy and is shut out of their camp, the camp, for 7 days. After the week is up, she is readmitted, and only then do the people move through the wilderness of Paran. As I said, it's my favorite story, and I've always been drawn to it because I saw it as one about community. And with Miriam's readmission, as a story of the importance of a leader, and in particular a female leader, to a community. But now, in our time, I see the story as an object lesson for any individual, because I think we can all understand we are all Miriam. In a time of the pandemic, we each are shut out, pushed to the fringes, and isolated made vulnerable and afraid. And yet, as the story goes on, we see we will return to our families, to our communities, and to our world, even though it may be changed. We are each Miriam. Ultimately, I read Numbers 12 as a story of optimism and strength. And so to better understand the story, I want to focus then on the unasked question underlying it. Between her being shut out and her readmittance, what was Miriam thinking for 7 days? And in so doing, we may discover that the thoughts that we're projecting onto her are really our own, at least in part. So I'd like to alliteratively consider each day when successively she may have examined the ideas of reflection, remembrance, regret, resilience, reimagining, relief, and return. Reflection, of course, is the process of looking within ourselves to assess our thoughts and behavior and to ponder a particular situation as we consider our next steps. It's generally an internal process, though it may involve consulting others as we chart the course that we would like to take in our lives. And in an almost too obvious metaphor, reflection means holding up a mirror to our inner self. It can be a painful process of reconciliation and confronting hard truths. At this critical time, it seems it's an urgent imperative to reflect on our own role in creating the conditions that manifest in a polarized country, that perpetuate the lies that we tell ourselves, perhaps to soothe our conscience. Don't worry, the mirror won't crack, though ultimately what we see might not be as familiar to us as we once thought. Remembrance is an important part of reflection and perhaps made up Miriam's second day. Remembering is a powerful act that often takes much courage. It's deliberate and it's active. What do we choose to remember and what do we choose to pass on? What starts to fade with the passage of time? Stories, or in other words, our narratives, are the products of remembrance. And we treat others with respect when we remember their stories. We remember now what we had, fearing its loss, and that underscores the deep anguish we feel in the days of distance and confinement. And as these days turn into weeks, which turn into months, and in moments of deep honesty, we probably need to acknowledge it may extend into at least a year. Regret acknowledges that human beings are not perfect creatures. Whether purposely or inadvertently, we hurt others. And with even a modicum of self-awareness, this should trigger regret for our actions. And so we must seek forgiveness. And at a personal level, that can be difficult and complicated. At a societal level, we need to acknowledge that we are complicit in the conditions that have led to the protests that we have seen. Healing never begins without such an acknowledgement. The poet Mary Oliver wrote, "Someone I once loved gave me a box full of darkness. It took me years to understand that this too was a gift." Resilience is the capacity to see such gifts and not be defeated by them. At the midpoint of her separation, Miriam is perhaps considering her own resilience. That's the capacity to adapt and to reinvent our worlds in ways that we may never have considered due to circumstances we might not ever have been able to foresee. We each can find our own resilience. Recognizing that we will be undeniably different, that difference can be measured in strength, outlook, and perspective. So we should take to heart the words of Maya Angelou, who said, "I can be changed by what happens to me, but I refuse to be reduced by it." Reimagining the world into which we will reemerge can be exciting and exhilarating. It represents empowerment and optimism. We each have a role to play, a critical role to play in achieving racial equity. The world we re-enter need not be rife with injustice. It can be profoundly good if we commit to it. Social justice can define the coming year so that when we begin 5782, we can be proud of what we have accomplished. Relief should be expected as we complete a year like no other. Our burdens are simultaneously deeply personal and yet shared. Gratitude accompanies our relief at surviving. And I think we can newly appreciate the words of Mick Jagger, who said, or sang, "You can't always get what you want, but if you try sometime, you find you get what you need." We need to be apart right now, not because we want to, but because we have to. But how much sweeter will be the homecoming as we marvel at our capacity to discover and rely on our own humanity. The week of being shut out reaches its end in the text and in our consideration of the story. Readmittance marks the journey's conclusion. We need to prepare ourselves for rejoining the community. What new covenant will we make? Accepting new obligations and perhaps altering expectations. We each are necessarily different than how we began. That mirror that we held on the first day awaits us. So let us return to it, coming full circle like the cycle of the week reaching another Shabbat, and the cycle of the year reaching another Rosh Hashanah. And then we'll be able to wish each other not only Shana Tova, a good year, but a sincerely felt Baruchim Habaim, welcome. I wish you all Shana Tova.
Thank you so much. Next, we have Rabbi Denise Handlarski, who lives in Toronto, Ontario, Canada, and is rabbi of secularsynagogue.com.
Hi, everybody. I'm also reading an excerpt from my Rosh Hashanah commentary. And here we go. Rosh Hashanah is always an opportunity to look forward. As we embark on a new year, drawing on the Jewish wisdom that has us mark time and its passing, we think about what is before us. By that, I mean, what is in front of us. You'd think the words before us would relate to the past, to yesterday, to what came before. But we use it to mean the future. As we look forward, as in looking forward to the year ahead, we are future focused. But the word before reminds us of the tricky nature of time. What is past is always present. Our past informs and can, even if we let it, determine our future. And as we look forward or look back, we also need to remain mindful of the moment we are in. The tricky nature of time is why the previous year hangs like a specter in our imaginings of the year to come. This year, we have faced horrific wildfires, intensifying climate crises, a groundswell of Black Lives Matter activism, and a global pandemic. It would be impossible to look forward to the year to come and not wonder about how all this will continue to shape our lives. Of course, these things will shape our lives. We are not leaving the year or the past behind, but we bring it with us into the year that dawns. The tricky nature of time is also why we look to tradition to inform how we may approach the present and the future. We draw on sacred stories and texts, come together to mark these high holidays as Jews have done for centuries. And we let the wisdom of our forebears guide us, even as we carve out a future in times that would have been unrecognizable to those forebears. The past is present, as we are future focused. So this year, the story that informs my Rosh Hashanah commentary is the Akedah, the story of the binding of Isaac. Abraham, the father or founder of our people, according to the Hebrew Bible, is told by God to sacrifice his son Isaac as a sign of his devotion. In that first instance, when God calls Abraham, Abraham answers, Hineni, here I am. Abraham takes Isaac up the mountain where the sacrifice is to take place. He binds him to the altar, he picks up his knife. And then the angel of the Lord calls Abraham, Abraham, to which he once again answers, Hineni, here I am. The angel tells Abraham to stay his hand. Abraham sees a ram in the thicket, and sacrifices that creature in place of his son. And Abraham is told that as a reward for his devotion, his descendants, us, will be as numerous as the stars in the heaven and the sands on the seashore. There is much to say and much that has been said about this story, but here is one offering from me. The repetition of the word hineni is important. When Abraham is called, when he is tasked with the unimaginable, he answers by affirming his presence. And his presence is also what he can offer his son. They journey up the mountain alone, having left their servants at the bottom to wait. 3 days pass. They spend time alone and together. Abraham, unable to offer reassurances to his son, but able to offer his presence. To what and to whom will we offer that kind of devoted presence this year? We are being called, not from heaven, but by the circumstances of our world on fire, to think about how we face an uncertain future. We cannot offer each other reassurances, but we can offer each other presence. Hineni, I am here for you. This story, as part of Rosh Hashanah liturgy, reminds us to be present in our own reflections as we take account of our souls and our lives in the pursuit of our own goodness. It reminds us that the gift of presence we offer loved ones is the most precious gift of all. In times of distress or loneliness or pain, what better solace is there than to feel someone is there for us? What more important act than to say and demonstrate to those in our lives, I am here. Most read this story as a call to faith, but I read it as a call to presence. The devotion to self and community that comes out of active, willing, committed, and purposeful presence. Another central theme of this story is sacrifice. It is shocking that Abraham is so willing to kill his son, and Jews have wrestled with this for centuries. How could he? Would it be worth it if I was asked to make the same choice? When we normally think about parental sacrifice, we imagine it is a parent making sacrifices. We work hard, we do the Sisyphean tasks like laundry and dishes. We may limit our own freedom and sometimes the fun in our own lives for the well-being of our children. In this story, it is the child to be sacrificed. And on the surface, it seems unfathomable. However, we are living in a time when all of us collectively seem to be willing to sacrifice our children, the world's children, through our political gridlock and our collective denial and unwillingness to tackle climate change. When I read the story of the binding of Isaac, I now identify more with Abraham than I ever have. I feel like I am in that waiting place, sitting with my children on the precipice of a very uncertain future, and I'm unable to offer reassurance. I can offer my presence. Hineni, I am here. Just as Abraham hears the direction to kill his son and offers no resistance, we as a global community are behaving as though sacrificing of our kids' futures is inevitable, but it isn't. We, especially those of us with relative privilege, are not used to making the sacrifices that are required of us in this moment. Many of us live lives of relative comfort. So the idea of sacrifice, of changing the way we eat, travel, make and spend money, the kinds of homes we can live in, the kinds of conveniences we rely on, all of it seems impossible to shift. Until COVID. Obviously, COVID has been devastating, but if it has done something for us, it has given us a big shove from selfishness to sacrifice. Not everyone. But this is the first time in my life, certainly, that there has been a global shift in business as usual on this scale. To save lives, the lives of strangers, most of us have made great sacrifices. And I believe it serves as the training for the sacrifices before us. As we think about how to use the wisdom of our forebears, the stories in our tradition to make meaning, one way is to rewrite and reinterpret. And although it feels a little vulnerable for me to share this with all of you, this is the time of year for vulnerability and brave conversations. So I offer a poem, Hineni. I am here, will always be here, even when no longer needed, hoping you've heeded the words I offer, guesses at half-answered questions, my imperfect truths, my imaginings of what you'll require and desire, as you go out into the world, the life before you unfurled, your formidable choices, your small but resolute voices, attentive, ready, awake. Hineni. I am here. I was here for night feedings, knowing that being here is a constant call to action, a wake-up call, a shofar blast that's never in the past. As I sleep, I'm still perched on the edge, can be lurched awake at the slightest sound, trying to ground my thoughts in the present while dreaming and hoping that you will be okay, my babies. Hineni. I am here with unsure parental advice, willing to make any sacrifice, worried about the world, the life before you unfurled, wildfires, floods, blood in the streets, everywhere illness, no time for simplicity or stillness, our future at risk, so much you have to fix when we were the ones who broke it. My mind is future forward, your happiness my focus. Hineni. I am here, no vision to stay my hand against the destruction of all we've planned, doing all we can, dialogue across difference, protests and pickets, because you will not be the ram in the thicket. You are my whole hope, deserving of a good life and breath, and one day, a good death. I can't offer you assurances as we weather occurrence after occurrence of crisis, stasis, so much waste. But I see you and I offer you attention and presence and the resonance of these ancient and sacred words. Hineni. I started by speaking of the trickiness of time, how the present informs the past, and how the idea of what comes before and what is before us are in tension. The point of the high holidays is to receive the wake-up call, to be present to what is, even as we chart new directions, to remain mindful that every single day is a gift, and the gift we offer others is meaningful presence through our days. To say again in words and actions, whatever has come before and whatever is before us, I am here with you now. Hineni. Thank you, and Shana Tova.
Thank you so much. Next, we're going to hear from Rabbi Jeffrey Falick of the Birmingham Temple Congregation for Humanistic Judaism in Farmington Hills, Michigan.
No one should ever have to follow Denise, especially when she speaks that way, because now I'm in tears, but I'm going to soldier on. For those of you who don't have anywhere to be, I know many of our colleagues are offering their services online. Ours are on YouTube, and that means you don't have to be a member and you don't need a Zoom password or anything. So I'm going to put in that little plug. You can go to birminghamtemple.com and the link is right there. It posts at 6 o'clock on Sunday and it'll be there until my descendants are gone from this earth. On Rosh Hashanah, I decided to take on the American Jewish community. I do this a lot anyway. I've been reading a lot about the damage that the pandemic is causing to our community, and it concerns me. It concerns me as we return to the rebuilding process, because I feel that there is a big disconnect that continues. And I'll talk about where I think it's been most outstanding, but a big disconnect between the American Jewish leadership and most American Jews. I contend that even if they're not non-theistic humanistic Jews, our type, the agnostics, atheists, etc., most American Jews and Canadian Jews, I should throw in as well, are characterized by a set of very deeply held, broadly based humanistic ideas. They are appreciative of science, of open debate, of the universalistic kinds of concerns that we speak about when we talk about social justice, when we are addressing those who are marginalized, those who are disadvantaged. They appreciate that they have the freedom to make their own ethical and moral decisions, that they can make these decisions grounded in their own understanding of what they need, what humanity overall needs. And they do not do this by consulting religious teachings, authority, revelation, or tradition in an authoritative capacity. Doesn't mean they don't look into it, but that's who they are. This disconnect, and those of you who know me know that I'm from a much more traditional background, was apparent to me from the moment I entered my career, because that, in the very early 1990s, was the same time that the intermarriage panic broke out in this country. In 1991, 92, there was a national demographic survey. It showed that the magical red line of 50% intermarriage rate had suddenly taken off, had suddenly been crossed. And as a result, the American Jewish community began to plow billions, with a B, of dollars into remedying this. Among the important conversations that broke out was, what about intermarriage? What are we going to do? What are the rabbis going to do? The conversation from the very beginning, and at the time I was a Reform rabbi, I was part of the whole world of that, and leaning conservative of that clock. And the discussion was holding the fort, stopping this break in the floodgates, mixing my metaphors, keeping this from happening. And to the extent that we can refuse and promise each other we won't do them, we'll make progress on this. We'll stop it. Of course, that didn't work. People want to love who they love. But it came out of what I identify as a positioning of group loyalty, of Jewish loyalty, of tribalism, to use the most crude kind of term for it, at the top of our agenda as a community. Finally, of course, many of you know, Reform rabbis who always could have done intermarriages, though they didn't very much, agreed to do it. They made all kinds of excuses for it. It will be, or all kinds of, gave all kinds of reasons for it. It will be on the basis of encouraging non-Jewish spouses to build Jewish homes, raise Jewish children, one day become Jews. This statement I want to share with you verbatim. Although they said we do not use terms such as prohibition and sin to describe mixed marriage, and although we welcome mixed married households into our community, we do not condone mixed marriage itself. The truer words of the Reform movement have never been spoken. They still don't. Most of the spouses of the spouses from different heritages of Jewish couples who go, intermarried couples who go in to Reform temples find that they cannot access leadership positions, certainly not ritual positions. Intermarried Jews cannot become rabbis. That would have hurt our movement because we would have lost some of our greatest rabbis. Conservative rabbis, they can't, not only can they not perform intermarriages, they were only given permission fewer than 2 years ago to attend them as guests. For decades now, in reliable surveys, Jews have been telling these demographers that they consider these positions a violation of their most deeply held values. Some of them call it racist, not a few. Now, for those of you who want to explore our position on intermarriage, if you don't know it, the rabbi who spoke before me actually has the best compendium in her new book, The A through Z of Intermarriage. So I have to put that out there. But I also want to tell you a quick story before I conclude with, and I think I have 3-4 minutes. I have been aware of this doubling down of group Jewish loyalty, this positioning of Jewish survival as the highest Jewish value for a very long time. It was once one of my values, so I understand where it comes from, though I disagree. But I was never more struck by how it can become unreasonable, almost rejecting in a way that intermarriage and that issue never was, until I heard the sermon of one of my colleagues here, a conservative rabbi at a local, very large congregation, one of the larger conservative congregations in the country, a sermon that went around the world, republished in so many journals, called Time to Say Kaddish for Tikkun Olam. The rabbi's point, and he was right about one thing, and it was this, is that Tikkun Olam is kind of a modern repositioning by socially concerned, justice concerned kinds of people, Jews, of an ancient, really not related concept, be that as it may. We like it when old ideas take on new clothing, right? But then listen to what he said. He said, trying to shoulder the burden for all of the world's problems is not keeping Judaism alive, it's killing it. That Tikkun Olam itself is what is destroying the Jewish community. He went on to lambast Jewish support for Black Lives Matter because of some addendum to a statement that was made by one of the organizations that supports or coalesces Black Lives Matters groups. This for him was enough to call a break. His entire sermon was founded and based upon fear fear that the Jewish people would disappear, fear that if we didn't put Jewish family first, his words, that if we didn't look at all of these kinds of things, of this universalism, this turning our back on particularism, this trying to solve the problems of the world, if those values were not placed on the far back burner to Jewish survival and Jewish continuity, then we were goners. And I respectfully say to the Jewish community, I have heard too much of this in my life. We are going to be at some point coming out of this pandemic, and we know there will be wreckage. Jewish summer camps, Jewish schools, many synagogues are going to be lying in that wreckage. If the Jewish community does not reconsider its values right now and its priorities and create a Judaism that is, may I humbly say, more broadly humanistic, we will indeed be endangering Jewish survival. Sherwin once said that groups do not exist for their own sake. I'm paraphrasing. Jews do not exist for the group loyalty. The group exists to serve us. Judaism serves us in so many ways. You've heard from marvelous and eloquent colleagues tonight talking about the ways that Jewish tradition can serve us in our personal lives and as we're going through this crisis and beyond. But unless that's what our Judaism is about, along with all of the wonderful celebratory and other things that we have to offer, then the very goal that these leaders seek to advance will be defeated. I didn't say it in so many words, probably many more, but different ones. You can watch it because my Rosh Hashanah program will be there forever. Thank you for participating tonight. Thanks for Paul for inviting me, and thanks to all my colleagues. Good night, everybody. Shana Tova.
Shana Tova. Thanks so much. And last but not least, we have Rabbi Adam Shalom, who is Rabbi at Kol Hadash Humanistic Congregation in Deerfield, Illinois, and also Dean North America of the International Institute for Secular Humanistic Judaism.
Thank you, Paul. And I want to applaud my colleagues for their restraint in creating space for each other. In rabbinic thought, there's a concept of tzimtzum, where God contracts itself to create space for the world, and we've all done that tonight. Another one of my colleagues outside of our movement said that rabbis could easily sign up for Overtalkers Anonymous, which is also known by the name On and On and On. So we did a good job of keeping it concise, but that's a matter of choice. You know, each of us chose from what we talked about this high holidays. I have 4 sermons, 4 readings of Jewish literature, and a short piece at our memorial service, and I had to pick one idea out of the whole thing to talk about. So like Rabbi Kornfeld, I also chose to talk about Numbers chapter 12, although I started it in verse 1, because in verse 1, Moses is criticized by both Miriam and Aaron, even though the verb in the Hebrew is tidaber, so it seems to be Miriam criticizing, but it's also what they criticize him for. It says they spoke against him because of the Cushite, or the African woman whom he had married, because he had married an African woman, as if that's a self-evident basis for critique. When I read through this chapter, I realized I wouldn't have chosen this before, but I'm going to choose it this year because it talks about family dynamics under pressure. It talks about racial discrimination. It talks about unfair treatment of a woman, and it talks about a sudden disease and a desire for healing. I said, if I didn't know better, I would have thought it was written for this year, but it wasn't. You see, a Torah reading is like a Rorschach test. You can read into it what you want, but actually it shows you more about yourself and the issues you're connected to and interested in than it may about the text itself. So looking at this story, my theme this year in the high holidays is asking Jewish questions. So I talked about, am I my brother's keeper? If not now, when? Shall not the judge of the earth and all the judges on the earth do justice? And so on. Those kind of questions that come out of Jewish literature, but still have an impact on our lives today. So I have more questions about this story than answers, but I think they highlight part of the challenge in reading Torah literature, and specifically this story. Is this story one that is just or unjust? Well, consider various moments. Are Miriam and Aaron justified in their complaints because of Moses' transgression of marrying out, especially to a Cushite or African woman, or is their ethnocentric or even racist bias the real sin in the story. And there is some justification for them to be punished. Of course, the presentation is they challenged his authority, but we might say they were jerks and maybe they deserved at least some correction. Is the Hebrew God justified in his anger on behalf of Moses at their rebellion? We have to remember that it's only a few chapters later in the same book of Numbers that another rebellion against Moses takes place under Korach, the Levite, who makes almost the same argument. Has God only talked to Moses? Why can't he talk to all the Levites or all the people? All the people are holy. And that rebellion results in hundreds of deaths. So maybe the attempt is a short-term punishment to prevent what takes place anyways. Does it make sense in the story? Moses supposedly wrote the 5 books of Moses, but it says explicitly in this part of the story, Moses was the humblest man who ever lived. Now, would the humblest man who ever lived brag about being the humblest man who ever lived? This is aside from the claim that God says he's the best prophet ever. He even gets to see the image of God, when later parts of the Torah say God doesn't have any image. So it's the Torah arguing with itself, but it's a topic to explore somewhere else. Maybe a question to ask other people who are more conventional or traditional. I also recall in this story that Moses, Aaron, and Miriam are all siblings. They all came from the same womb. They all have the same mother and same father, evidently. Moses is actually the youngest of these, and yet the youngest has become the preeminent prophet. So could this story really be one of sibling rivalry? I mean, notice that what Miriam and Aaron complain about is Moses' wife. Evidently, having in-laws has never been easy, even back to these stories. When I read Yahweh saying, you 3 come to my office, and Miriam and Aaron come out here, it sounds a lot like an angry parent. And the examples given by Aaron and Yahweh around Miriam's affliction are family examples. Aaron says to Moses, don't let her become like someone who comes out of their womb half consumed, subtly reminding Moses, we came out of the same womb. And God says Miriam's punishment is like a rebellious daughter who's been corrected by her father. And therefore, that's again an example of the parental correcting of the child, or the children arguing with each other. Miriam is struck by a plague of divine origin, and Moses prays to that same divinity for healing. And in our era of global pandemic, people are debating that same theological question of the source of the disease and the source of healing. Is it the same? Is that source aware and listening, or are we on our own to face a silent and indifferent universe with the power of human caring and human healing? The famous text in the Torah passage is Elna Refana La, God, please heal her, oh, please heal her. For us, it might express a wish, but it doesn't fix the problem. We feel the need to rely on human responses, but that's part of our ongoing debate on disease and healing. And perhaps the most challenging, both Miriam and Aaron complain against Moses, but only Miriam is struck with the disease. Perhaps Aaron's duties and privileges as high priest prevented him from facing the same consequences. He needed to stay pure to offer sacrifices, so he was just too important to deal with any punishment that might have come his way for challenging Moses. Now, Aaron does appeal for Miriam to be healed, as does Moses, but maybe Aaron's just afraid that he's coming up next. He got a temporary reprieve, but if it doesn't get fixed, then he's going to be struck second. And it is heartening to read, as Rabbi Kornfeld pointed out, that the community did not leave until Miriam was rehabilitated. But it's disappointing to see a double standard with a woman on the short end again. Now, I have my own verdict on the injustice of this story, but readers of the story are a jury of the whole Jewish people and those of other heritage who celebrate with them. So whom would we condemn and whom would we forgive? How will we write our own stories of family dynamics under pressure, racial discrimination, the unfair treatment of women, and a surprise disease that threatens to spread? Well, in the end, the final version of that story is going to be up to each of you. And I'll turn it back to Paul.
Thank you so much. So I just want to thank everybody, all the rabbis who spoke. We didn't coordinate content. We barely coordinated the webinar, but we did coordinate that, but we did not coordinate content. And yet the breadth of topics and the conversation, I knew that would happen, just knowing the kind of resources you all are for our movement. So I really appreciate it. As a Jewish communal professional, asking rabbis to do something in the week before Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur is usually career suicide. And yet you guys were all willing and very able to do this and to participate and to come in under the allotted time, which I would put our 9 rabbis against any other 9 rabbis of any other denomination to try to do that. I really appreciate it. It's very meaningful. We will post this video for folks who weren't able to attend live. I think people will get a lot out of it. And as I said to folks, if this raises issues or questions, all of these people after Yom Kippur are very accessible and want to have these conversations. So I encourage you to reach out to us or them, and Miriam and I at SHJ. We'd be happy to continue the conversation. But other than that, again, Shana Tova, thank you all for speaking, and thank you to everyone who attended. Bye-bye.